One high school night, a woman's figure appeared in the TV's static, vanished as I turned, but the next day, I found mud prints on my wrist and smelled her scent. Thank you for your subscription and likes. Let us bring you more stories. It really helps the channel grow. I don't have a Patreon or member, so if you want to support the channel in an extra way, please feel free to buy me a beer there. A link in the description. I hope you all have a really great Halloween. I want to tell you about something I heard from a coworker. Her name is Numi and we worked together for 2 years. Nozomi is a little older than me. She was a kind of supervisor at our company. She was in charge of training new employees. I learned the basics of my role in the company from her. One afternoon I had the chance to grab lunch with her, and it was nice to sit together and talk about work, gossip, and our private lives. We asked one another if we are dog or cat people, where we like to go on holiday, and other trivial things. I don't know how we got onto this subject. I forget, but the topic of one of our co-workers' kids skipping school came up. Nozomi said something like there was a time I refused to go to school too. She said that happened when she was in elementary school. I asked her if she was just playing true and skipping school for fun, and she said not. In my case, it wasn't really my fault that I had to skip school. In the end, I was able to get back on track after a month at the most. But what happened back then traumatized me. Suddenly I felt bad about asking if she skipped school for fun. I felt a little guilty for that, but a lot more curious as to why she was off school. I figured that since it had been referenced, I might as well ask, and she told me so. This is an experience which happened to Nozomi when she was in the 6th grade at elementary school. She said back then she was one of the tallest, if not the tallest, girl on her basketball team. She said that she was really enjoying school and doing well at basketball. Overall, she was a really happy kid. When she was at school, there was a period between the morning assembly and the first period in which her whole class would go and sit in the library and read books. No conversation was allowed. She said it was the most boring part of her day. She picked up a book aimed at teenagers from the library to read during that break. It wasn't very interesting. She ended up flipping through it absent-mindedly. She didn't really care much about the story. She just kind of skimmed it. She had been reading it for a couple of weeks, not really getting anywhere with it, and she always left it in the library. She got close to the end of the book and noticed something. There was some handwriting in the top corner of the page, and it read, "Go to the foreign language section. There will be a book called Anne of Green Gables on the bottom row. I'll be waiting for you on page 50. I've heard of things like that before. I think it's fairly common. It's a kind of prank conjured up by bored students. I like those kind of mysterious journeys, though I don't know. There's just something about setting off on a quest. Maybe that's just me, though could be a gamer thing anyway." In Nozomi's case, she ignored it and went right on back to reading her story. By the time the reading session had ended, she had pretty much forgotten about that note in her book. A little later on that day, she was in the library. She wanted to get a new book to read for the next reading session. She was reminded of that book when she walked past the foreign language section. She smirked and then threw caution to the wind and went in search of Anne of Green Gables. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? We would all do the same, right? She found the book pretty quickly and flipped to page 5050 with a smile on her face. Numi said that the handwritten words on page 50 read the following: "You found me. Thank you. Your next mission. We'll send you up to the nurse's room. Check the bulletin board. I left something on the reverse of a poster on the right. Well, I don't know about you, but I would go right up there to check it out. But having said that, I would expect that the message behind the poster would be something like, 'I can't believe you came this far, dumbass.'" And I half expected Numi to tell me her story ended with a punchline like that. But little did I know it didn't end there. She followed the instructions and headed up to the nurse's office. There were 4 posters on the bulletin board opposite the nurse's office. One of the posters had some kind of explanation of what happens to the body if you constantly stayed up late all the time. I would have liked to have seen that. Actually, no army waited there until no one was around, and then she got close enough to pull one of the 4 tacks that held the poster in place out. As soon as she pulled out that thumbtack on the right-hand corner of the poster, she felt something drop onto her fingertip. She grabbed it. Was a folded sheet of notepaper. Said it was folded up to be no bigger than a point note. She unfurled it, and the note read, "You're getting close to the end now. One last request, 4:00 p.m. girls' bathroom on the 4th floor of the building nearest to the North Gates cleaning supplies area. Come alone with this memo. Tell no one. There is something I want to show you." Numi said that there was something about the way that the mystery was playing out that had really captured her. Now she was all in. She said that for the rest of the day she couldn't get the idea of heading up to the 4th floor of that building out of her head. She could barely focus on lessons. That day, she was eager to meet the person who had written all of those notes in the books. She didn't breathe a word to her friends about her arrangement at 4:00 p.m. It was all hers. She told me that she even told her close friends that she walked home from school with to go on without her. That day, she excitedly climbed the steps of the north building to the 4th floor just before 4:00 p.m. She told me that she felt like the protagonist in her own story. She felt so very special. She paused after she explained that feeling to me, and I knew that something bad was coming. The thing about the 4th floor was the fact that hardly anyone went up. There were 2 empty classrooms and another classroom which was seldom used as a band practice play Sora instrument storage location. Numi told me that it was rare to see anyone up there, especially after class hours. She headed into the girls' bathroom. She said it seemed to have a certain aura, but maybe that was due to her excitement. The autumn sunlight was shining in through the window. She found the door marked cleaning supplies. It was a wooden door and it looked like it was well worn, to say the least. She stood in front of it with a heart that was fluttering in her chest, and she called out, "Is anyone there?" All she heard in response was the sound of her own voice echoing in the empty bathroom. There was no response. She decided to knock and again there was no response. She reached out and grabbed the handle, braced herself and then tried it. It didn't budge, it was locked. She thought about it and realized that the note said 4:00 p.m. after school, but it didn't specify a date. Maybe it wasn't today. Maybe the person who wrote that note wrote it a long time ago. Perhaps they weren't even at the school anymore. Just as she was about to give up and go home, she noticed a small hole in the door. It wasn't a big hole. It was no bigger than 5 millimeters or just short of quarter of an inch. The hole was about chest height. Just above the hole in the door was some writing in magic marker, and it read, "Here and just below." That was another message, the final message. "There's something I want to show you." So Numi bent down and prepared herself to look through the hole in the door. She brought her eye closer to the roughly cut hole and squinted to see inside. It looked so dark in there. It was hard to make out anything. She said it was pitch black in there. It all seemed so anticlimactic. Then suddenly an unknown feeling flowed into her, some kind of strong feeling of disgust. The mystery was gone and fear had arrived in its place. It was as if a SI sense kicked in. She innately knew that she needed to get away from that door, from that hole, and just as she withdrew her face, something happened. It was almost simultaneous. There was a sharp thrashing, jousting noise. A flathead screwdriver came bursting through the small hole in the door. Had Nozomi waited a second longer, then she would be telling me about her experience with a glass eye. I guess the flathead screwdriver missed her eye by a hair's breadth. She said that it took her a few seconds to fully comprehend what was happening. She watched as the flathead screwdriver jabbed and stabbed through the hole and then finally retracted. Numi didn't have the guts to put her eye to the hole. To try and catch a glimpse of her would be attack her. And to be honest, I don't think any of us would either. In her shoes, she didn't think about screaming or running until she saw that screwdriver disappear. The second it was gone, something clicked and she ran for it. She said she tripped over her own feet, clattered into one of the stalls but got back on her feet again and raced downstairs. Although she was confused and frightened, she managed to tell a teacher. The teacher went up there and Numi followed on behind her. She said that when the pair of them got up there, they saw the cleaning supplies closet was now open. It was closed before and locked. The pair of them didn't find anything up there apart from, unsurprisingly, some cleaning supplies. A mop and a broom were tilted against the corner. The incident was reported and, due to the concern that it provoked, a school assembly was organized. Questionnaires regarding the event was sent out to the students and encouraged to be filled out anonymously. It sounded like it was being taken very seriously, but they weren't able to find the culprit. I asked Nozomi how she felt about the situation and she said something along the lines of, even though it was a close call, I didn't want the attention. I didn't want to be the girl who was attacked. You know, I didn't want that to be my thing. I just wanted to move on and graduate. I just guessed it was some kind of edgy prank. Having said that, the whole thing clearly traumatized Numi. She admitted to being out of school for a while, and if that happened to me, I think I'd be the same. She admitted that she doesn't like looking through peepholes. You know, those door scopes to check if someone is outside or not. Yeah, the image of a screwdriver coming through one of those must be pretty hard to shake off. I asked her if she had any clue as to who might be behind it, and she said I never did anything to anyone. I swear I wasn't a bully. I never did anything to make anyone hate me. That seemed to be a little look behind the metaphorical curtain. I wondered if I was being tricked by some kind of linguistic sleight of hand, so I changed the way I phrased my question and I asked would there be anyone who might benefit from something bad happening to you. Numi looked off into space and wrinkled her eyebrows, thought about my question for a couple of seconds, and then eventually she murmured. Sayaka Saka happened to be a friend from her basketball team. She said that Saka was in constant competition with her during practice and for a place in the team. Due to the trauma of the screwdriver incident, Numi, my work colleague, quit the team for a while. I get it. I would probably stay home too. In her absence, Sayaka got the spot on the team. It seemed to be the only motive she thought possible for someone to attack her. She said that she couldn't think of a single other person at the school who might have had a motive. She said that she didn't think it would be possible that it could be. Her Seiko was one of the happiest and supportive girls she'd ever met. She was the one who welcomed her onto the team and took her under her wing. You know, she wasn't the resentful type by the sound of it. Nozomi said that she was always full of cheer for her teammates, and didn't seem to have a bad bone in her body by the way she was described. She sounded like the picture, perfect example of cheerfulness. She was apparently well-liked too, so it seemed completely unthinkable to Nozomi that someone that nice would be capable of something so malicious. I don't know about you, but I could imagine some jealous teammate leading her some secluded to attack her. Who else would know about the secluded areas of the school? I could picture some jealous girl hiding in the dark with a screwdriver. It did kind of seem plausible to me. I asked Nozomi if she thought it was possible that her basketball teammate was behind this, and she flat out said no way. I asked her if she remained friends after all that went down. She said Saka went on to a different high school, but she had a look for her on social media and found out she's now a kindergarten teacher. That's a scary thought to me, especially if she was behind the whole screwdriver thing. That was about the point I got to with her before our break ended. We went back to work and I haven't brought it up with No Oni, since I guess that's a night ending in a sense. Her would be a fellow elementary school student rather than some disturbed dad. All scary either way though, right? This happened to me 10 years ago, and it's something I will never forget. I used to sleep in the same room as my brother when I was younger. We had bunk beds. He had the top bunk and I had the bottom. I was asleep that night and I had a horrible nightmare. I was suddenly grabbed by my wrist and I was being pulled towards the bedroom window. I turned to face what had latched onto me and I saw that the window was wide open. Then I saw my attacker. It was a woman with severe burn marks on her face. She had long, dark, scraggly hair and she was wrenching me out of bed with all of her might. I had never felt a sense of terror like that before or again. It was as if my heart was in a vice. I was petrified. I was 12 years old when this happened and it was just unbearable. I tried to remember that it was just a dream. I told myself that there was no way that this could be happening. I resisted against the stranger, but I wasn't as strong as she was. I just held on to the bedpost with my right arm with all my might. I don't know how long this tug of war went on for, but it felt like ages. Suddenly I lost my grip. I guess that might be due to how much I was sweating with fear. I was dragged along the floor. I felt like I was getting carpet burn. I finally was dragged up to the window. I could feel the cold October air spilling into our bedroom. How the hell was my brother asleep during this? I prayed that he would wake up and come save me. I told myself I was just dreaming, and if my brother was awake then he would see me sound as asleep in the bottom bunk. The woman leaned down to pick me up and her face came closer to my own. I could smell her now and she smelled like dying leaves in a clogged drain. I hated it as she picked me up and propped me on her shoulder. I had a terrifying feeling that I was about to leave my bedroom, and I'd never be able to come back again. I didn't want to go out into the cold with this scary woman. I wanted to stay at home with my family. I remember a thought that came to mind: it's no good, it's hopeless. The woman then started to softly chuckle. It was as if she reveled in my hopelessness. I don't know why, but that seemed to light a fire in me. I knew that I needed to act. I decided to try and laugh myself. I don't know why it was a dream and dreams are weird, but I thought that if I laughed right back at her, it would at least wipe that smirk off her dirty face. As soon as I laughed, I opened my eyes and I was awake. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the floor out of my bed beneath the windowsill. I looked up at the window and braced myself. I was expecting to see the woman from my nightmare loom over me, but I didn't. I did, however, see that the window was wide open. I scrambled backwards to the bedroom door and got to my feet. I hit the lights. I was feeling braver. Now I was waking up, so I went to the window and looked out to see if I could see anyone down there. I couldn't. I'm not saying that there wasn't anyone there. I'm just saying because it was autumn. It was too dark for me to see anyone. It was silent out there. All that I could hear was the wind whistling through the branches of the trees. I was relieved and I thought to myself it must have been one hell of a realistic dream. I guessed that the wind could have blown the window open, or something. Perhaps I'd had my first little episode of sleepwalking too. I mean, it was unlikely but not impossible. I still had a strange feeling about that dream, though it was as if I could still feel the grip of the woman in the nightmare. I wanted to make sure I wanted to feel safe. Then I noticed something that shattered my belief in the hope that it had been just a dream. I looked down to see a dirty set of fingerprints connected by a palm print wrapped around my wrist. I wish I hadn't seen that the fingerprints were grimy and dirty. It looked like the owner of those fingerprints had been in a very dirty place for a very long time. They smelled like a mixture of ash and dead leaves. The smell scared me so much because in my nightmare I had smelled dead leaves. I screamed. I woke up my younger brother. He complained about the room being too cold and then I told him what happened. I got him to look at the fingerprints on my wrist. He witnessed them. I shut the window and that was the last time I slept with the window open. I never saw the woman from my nightmare again with the burned face, but I don't think I can ever forget her. It really frightens me that the lines between the dream and reality are so blurred. I have no idea what is real. People tend not to believe me when I tell them about my experience, but I don't care. I think about people who go missing. You know, one night they're sleeping soundly in their beds and come morning they're gone. I wonder how close my name was to joining a missing persons list. That thought still terrifies me to this day. Sometimes I get too scared to sleep, especially on those dark, cold autumn nights. This happened about 5 years back when I had just landed a job in an office. I was living with my younger sister at the time. She was a high school student. On the day this experience took place, I came home from work on time, which was a pretty rare thing for me. Back then I went into the living room and plopped myself down on the sofa. I started scrolling through my phone. It was still the evening. It was autumn, but the sun hadn't set yet, so it was still kind of bright out, so I didn't bother turning the lights on. I sat there in my living room as the sunlight slowly faded. When the room was getting a little dark, I heard something from upstairs. It sounded like laughter and then some people talking. Well, like I said, I was living with my high school-age sister at the time, so I mean laughter wasn't exactly rare at my place. I just assumed she had invited some friends over. This usually was the case. I tried to ignore it and carry on reading whatever I was reading on my phone. After a while I realized that it sounded like the conversation they were having up there was getting a little heated. It was really strange because my sister never really argued with her friends, and stranger still, one of them was laughing. That laughter slowly grew louder. It was pretty annoying. Kept on getting louder and louder until it reached a cackle. What the hell were they doing up there? Playing a game or something? It didn't make sense and I was a little bit worried. One of the neighbors would complain. Back then we had a neighbor who was a real difficult guy. I already knew that I would be hearing his thoughts on this when I saw him next. When they started banging on the floor, I knew that they had gone too far. I had to go up there and tell them to shut up. As I was getting to my feet, I heard one of them let out a long sustained scream, a real ear-piercing one. I froze. It didn't really sound like my sister or one of her friends could make a noise like that. I walked over to the light switch and turned it on, and then naturally I looked up the banging. I guess it was kicking or something was getting so loud and powerful that the light in the living room was shaking. The scream turned into some kind of guttural growl. They sounded like singers from a metal band. It was seriously disturbing to hear. I had to go up there. I bet she had some boys over. He probably thought that I was going to be late home again. So with that in mind, I started marching up the stairs to give them a piece of my mind and probably kick the boys out. I left the living room and turned to climb the stairs to the second floor, but I realized something was off. I have to tell you a bit about my house for you to get this. So, basically by the front door there is an area where we take our shoes off. It's called the Genkan and it's common in Japan. So when I turned to go upstairs, I stopped because I noticed that my sister's shoes weren't in the place we take our shoes off. If she had someone over or a couple of people over, then I would have expected them to take their shoes off before they came in. She knew the house rules. In fact, she enforced them. So that's why I was stunned to see no shoes by the front door. I paused and tried to make sense of the situation. I thought to myself, am I the only one home? I mean, that simply couldn't be true. What about all the noises I heard upstairs? What about all the laughing? Seemed like the second I realized that I froze in place. I couldn't move. The laughter stopped and the house fell silent. All I could do was stare at the dark staircase in front of me. It was pitch black upstairs. All the lights were off up there. I couldn't see anything. I felt so uneasy. I felt like something was about to happen. It was such a terrifying, unknown fear I've never experienced again. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. I couldn't move a muscle. I then heard a faint sound coming from upstairs. I recognized it instantly. It was a sound of my sister's bedroom door opening. It had a squeak to it. She wanted to oil the hinges to get rid of the squeak, but I wouldn't allow it. Squeaks and creaks are good. They let you know where people are. That squeak told me my sister's door had just opened, and that perfectly mundane sound scared the hell out of me. Next, I heard the sound of someone stepping on the landing up there. I knew deep down that someone was not my sister. I heard that footfall approaching the stairs. Someone's coming. When that thought hit me, I was suddenly freed from whatever had a hold on me. It was a similar feeling to unclenching. I quickly left the foot of the stairs and ran into the living room. When I got back into the living room, I realized that the lights were off. I also surprised because I knew I had turned it on. Also, it was really dark outside now, so I have no clue how much time elapsed when I was temporarily paralyzed there. I hit the lights immediately and turned the TV on. I put the volume up really loud. I didn't care about the neighbors. I didn't want to be forced out of my house, so I just waited there until I managed to calm myself down. I curled up on the sofa and tried to distract myself. If I hadn't noticed the lack of shoes in the gone, I would have gone up there. And that frightens me. What the hell was up there waiting for me? When my sister came home, I told her about my experience and she was super mad at me. For some reason, she never slept in that room again. She took over the lounge. We heard weird noises from time to time coming from that room. We always kept the door shut. I even put a lock on the outside to stop the door randomly squeaking open when it was dark. We moved out after about 6 months. I wonder if the new residents have started using that room. Have you ever been traumatized by a sound? I heard it late night a few years back and it still gives me the creeps. I say a few years, but come to think of, it was 8 years ago. I was working in the textile industry at the time at my company. It was pretty normal to get transferred to different stores and areas. This would happen once every 3 years. It was really good, to be honest, and I looked forward to where I would end up living. The best part was the company footed the bill for the housing. They paid the rent. I got transferred to a new location, and I was given an apartment surrounded by rice fields and old houses. This wasn't exactly ideal. I felt as if I was going to be living in the middle of nowhere. I ended up liking the place more than I thought I would. The only thing that was an issue was the KNS. It was near pitch blackout even in the summer, as there weren't many street lights for a while. I was pretty nervous when I was walking home at night. I walked faster than I did in the city. As the days and weeks went by, I gradually got used to it. I was getting used to my new life, but my sense of security was shattered. It's got to be something bad, some kind of weirdo or someone with bad news. Those kinds of thoughts were going around my head as I approached the door. I had an intercom which lit up and showed me the outside of the door when someone rang the doorbell. Thankfully, I didn't need to open the door until I had seen who was out there. It wasn't Ring doorbell because this happened a while ago, but if you can imagine, it's pretty much the same. The only difference is a delay to the internal intercom screen lighting up. I went to look and see who was out there, but all I could see was darkness. Maybe a couple moths and flying bugs attracted to the light of the intercom. It really freaked me out that there was no one there. I guess that it could have been a malfunction or something. I watched as the intercom screen went back to standby, and then I turned to go back to bed. I froze in my tracks when I heard the door ring twice behind me. I turned back to the intercom to check if there was anyone there. But just as before, all I saw was darkness. I was really scared at that point. I could do little less than to climb back into the safety of my bed, and tried to ignore it until the morning. I would have felt stupid calling the police over someone ringing the doorbell. They would have laughed at me that night. I don't think I got more than an hour of sleep. It was so weird. I thought that it might just be a one-of-a-kind thing, but I was wrong. It was just the beginning. From that day on, the doorbell would ring every night. It usually happened around 2 a.m., but sometimes earlier and sometimes it was later. I got so scared that I was having trouble sleeping. I know I probably sound a little dramatic here, but picture yourself in my shoes. I was in a new rural area with no family and friends nearby. I think after the third night it happened. I called the building owner and I spoke with my boss at my company in the morning. This resulted in a promised increase in police patrols in the area. I thought that would deter whoever was doing this, but it didn't. The doorbell still rang. I was never quick enough to catch whoever was out there messing with me. I literally couldn't take the lack of sleep anymore, so I did something different. I removed the doorbell button and covered it over with tape. That ought to stop their little game. I thought I was kind of ashamed. I had to do that because I realized that I would have to explain whenever I ordered anything online that they had to knock on the door because the doorbell was out of order. That night, I fell asleep as usual, but I didn't wake up until the morning. Disabling the doorbell had worked. It was great to get a full night's sleep. I guess that whoever was messing with me must have moved on to another target or simply given up. I laughed at myself for getting worked up over some stupid prank in the morning. Before heading to work, I checked the doorbell to see if they had pulled away the tape or done something different. I was shocked by what I saw next to the intercom. Written in dark red was a message. It read, "What's wrong?" It sent shivers up my spine. Someone was out there last night and I didn't even hear them. I contacted my boss and the police. The police said they had nothing to go on. Since there was no witnesses, my boss gave me a couple options. I could stay there, move, or transfer to someplace else. Fortunately, I had an opportunity to transfer right away and I took it. I moved very far away. I had no other troubles in my new place or in any other place I had lived up until now. But I often think about that apartment with a consistent late-night visitor. I wonder who was doing that or for what reason. Maybe things would have gotten worse if I stayed longer than I did. I feel for anyone who has to live there. Even now it still gives me the creeps. I really think that I left before something major started. I can still remember the sound of the doorbell ringing in the dead of night. I got a call the other night from one of my friends. It was completely out of the blue. I will call her E. She is a complete skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. She doesn't even believe in UFOs or extraterrestrials. So anyways, E calls me in a complete panic, all worked up. She was pleading with me to go over to her place as soon as possible. To be honest, I had never heard her escalate like that before. So I said I'll be there as soon as I can, and then I hung up and left. I was really worried. My mind was curing up all kinds of horrible scenarios. I left my half-eaten dinner on the table and I raced outside. It was a cold night and there was a light rain. When I arrived at her apartment, I ran up the stairs to her floor and I banged on her door. She opened the door wearing a towel. She clung on to me and pleading Ed with me through tear-filled eyes to spend the night with her. She didn't want to be alone. I could tell that something horrific had happened, something that she couldn't admit to straight away. I thought the worst. To be honest, I thought that she had been attacked. Maybe some stalker or weirdo had done something to her. I really feared for her. To begin with, she needed to get dressed, so I went with her into her bedroom, as she refused to go alone. Next I sat her down on the sofa and I went to get her a drink. E was slowly regaining her composure, and she was gradually becoming more and more talkative. I really liked her. We hung out all the time at university, so it was really troubling for me to see her in that state. She told me what was going on. But in order for you to understand, let me start at the beginning. We were talking at lunch that day with a mutual friend, and that friend was banging on and on about ghost stories and stuff like that. I mean, I get it. Halloween was right around the corner while he was talking. He stood up and shouted, "It's not possible, shut up." As you might have guessed, this caused a bit of a commotion in the cafeteria. You know, a bit of a stir. Heads got turned and she blushed a little. So our mutual friend replied to her by saying, "Hey, don't say that you're asking for a haunting. Maybe a ghost will pay you a visit one day, huh?" And then he comes back with, "They don't exist. If they did, I would have seen one by now." I wouldn't say that they didn't exist. If I had seen one, I guess it did make sense. Kind of, it was a little close-minded though, but plausible. Well, fine, don't believe. Then just don't spend too long around water, because it's easy for them to appear there. He replied to our friend, "Oh yeah, water, yeah, lots of water." I got it, and then she started laughing at us. It really annoyed me at the time. Actually, he is a great friend, but got him. She can be rude and condescending sometimes. Hi Jay, here in Japan water and ghosts go hand in hand. It goes back to ancient times, but modern references are Ringu Hanok over the toilet, dark water. The list goes on, as well as the natural disasters that have occurred in Japan. So for that reason water is linked to the paranormal. Back to the story. So now he was composed enough to talk. She told me about what happened that night. She was taking a shower and she was reminded of our friend's claims of ghosts appearing around water. So there she was washing, and she was about to wash her face before leaving the shower. And she decides to challenge the paranormal. She calls out to the empty bathroom, "If ghosts exist, I want to see one right now, right before my eyes when I get done washing my face." She thought that if she had seen something by her own eyes, she would be happy to admit to us that the paranormal does exist. As she finished her request, she slowly opened her eyes. I guess there is no such thing as ghosts, after all. Then she said proudly as she looked around the empty bathroom. She grabbed a towel, put it around her, and turned to leave the bathroom, smiling at how stupid the thought of ghosts were. She turned the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Even when she pushed her way against the door, it wouldn't move. Did I lock the door? She thought to herself. She told me that she usually didn't lock the door, because she was the only one living in her apartment. So she goes to unlock the door, but right before she does it, something catches her eye. This is going to take some explaining. Okay, so some of the older apartments our university provided had vents in the bathroom doors. They were near the bottom of the door. So when she went to unlock the door, she said she spotted something in that vent. She said that there was a pair of eyes staring at her from behind the vent. Someone was peeping on her. The purpose of the vent was to allow the flow of air, but it was slanted so no one should be able to look into the bathroom, as that would be a privacy issue. So logically it made no sense. I mean, how could a pair of eyes be staring at her? The gap just isn't there. Surely she would be able to make out more than just the eyes. There was something seriously weird about her claims. It was crazy. I knew well though, and how openly she refuted the paranormal and always searched for the logical. I am certain that something happened in that bathroom, and I do believe that she saw some eyes staring at her, and that thought sends a shiver up my spine. She said that she stood there for a few moments, staring back at the eyes that were staring at her from the vent. She was unable to move or make a sound. Then a sudden realization came to her. She decided that she needed to move, and fast she put all her strength into throwing the bathroom door open, and thankfully, now that she had unlocked it, it came open. She half expected to see someone behind the door, but there wasn't anyone there. The apartment was empty. She looked back at the ventilation panel and she could no longer see the eyes. That was when E flew into a panic and grabbed her phone to call me. As a result of her experience, she set about taping up any gap that she thought the eyes could peer at her from, and she no longer mocked ghost stories. She wouldn't even listen to them. I have no idea what she saw, but I found it pretty creepy. Hi Jay here. This experience reminded me of an urban legend. I will go over it now very briefly, and if there's any interest, maybe I could put this in the next urban legend collection. Just let me know. So, the girl in the gap, or Sima Ainer, is a Japanese urban legend about a female spirit that lives in gaps or cracks in one's home. If you meet her gaze, she will ask you to play hide and seek and then vanish. If you decide to look for her and happen to see her again, she'll drag you into another dimension through that gap, because it's thought that the gaps that she comes from connect to another plane of life. Just thought I'd mention that briefly. I want to share an experience I had in my hometown. I say town, but it's often been described as a village. I live in a very rural area. Picture this: miles and miles of fields and farmlands. Some of the farmlands are well maintained and some are not. I think some are not in use and, for want of a better phrase, abandoned. This story involves an area of abandoned farmland. Someone shared that they found some weird protuberances or bumps in the earth on a message board, and they said that it was way out deep in the mountain in a farm field. So when I read that the location was in my town, I just had to set off on a hike and try to find it. I knew where it was because, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen anyone make use of that piece of land. It's always been abandoned. My friends and I played soccer there a couple of times when I was younger. I found it and there were a few of these weird bumps in the ground just like the message board had said. I didn't know how they got there. I just kind of thought who nature's pretty weird, huh? I forgot about it for a while. Summer got too hot for hiking by the time autumn came around. I thought I'd head back out on a hike to see if they were still there. I was quite interested in them. I reached the field again and I noticed that things were different this time. Apparently someone had moved into our town and had wanted to rent that field. They were in the process of leveling it so they could make use of it. I managed to meet this individual at his field and I asked him how it was going. Naturally, the bulges in the land were broken down to make the field flat. I asked him about what was underneath them, and he told me that he had made a strange discovery. Something was within them. First of all, there was a layer of some kind of blanket or quilt which, although quite badly damaged, looked very luxurious. Underneath that was some wood and bamboo. These materials were burned in areas. These things must have been buried there by someone. Further down beneath the wood were bones. The guy who owned the field thought that they were animal bones. He said that they were large bones. He hired some landscapers to restore the field and one of them was a hunter. He told him that he thought the bones might have belonged to a boar or a deer. I didn't buy this. The largest animals that I had seen in my rural area were tanuki. I really doubted that those bones belonged to an animal from my town. Maybe they had been brought here from another area. I mean, that's the only explanation. We just don't have big animals in the wild here. The guy who owned the field consulted some of the locals about his discovery, and he said that the main consensus was that some kind of ritual was carried out here. In the end, people in my town started to get very suspicious of what had been happening out there in the mountainous woods. The fact that the bones weren't buried that deep got people worried. Someone wasn't all that worried about them being found. It gets so dark in the mountains during the autumn and winter, and very few people head into the woods at night. So whoever was out there in that field would have been able to come and go as they please. Rumors began to spread that there was some kind of ritualistic cult active in our town. That honestly scared the hell out of me, I think, because it seemed so plausible. A few days went by and I bumped into the new guy in the local store. I used this opportunity to ask him what he had done with the animal bones, and he told me that he incinerated them. That's really surprised me. I would have probably hung on to them, called the authorities to investigate. I pressed him for more information, but he didn't want to talk about it. He was being evasive and not interested in continuing any conversation with me. He didn't seem as easygoing as he did on the field that day. I wondered if there was something that he was not telling me. I mean, you don't just find a pile of bones buried on your land and just incinerate them without even getting them checked right. Am I crazy here? I would want to know where they came from. I wondered if maybe someone had intimidated him after his discovery. I know I sound like I could be making mountains out of molehills here, but something is not right. I think if there was some kind of cult out here, they got to him and told him to keep his mouth shut. I have had a while to think about this, about a year. I have a theory about the quilt. I think that the remains of whatever was burned out there was covered with the quilt after the fact, to help prevent the smell of jarred meat attracting animals and residents of the town. I will tell you why I think that is the case. He's no longer in town. He just up and left. Never saw that man again. I think that something is going on in this town. I never went back to see what the field looks like now because I think that would be a little risky. I mean, I could go at night or something. It's pretty dark. It is October after all. It is a bit risky, though I'm really curious but also quite frightened of that field. Note: there have been no further posts by this user. This happened when I moved to Tokyo. I moved there from my home because I got a place at a good college. There I managed to get an apartment close to college and also in a safe area. The best part about that apartment was the fact that it was in a newly built building. I thought that it would be the perfect place to live, but as early as my first night in that place I knew something was wrong. It was at about 10 p.m., and I had pretty much finished unpacking all of my things. I heard a strange voice and it sounded like it was coming from inside the apartment. I looked for the source of the sound and I wondered if I could overhear the neighbor's TV through an open window or maybe a vent. Did I quickly discover that wasn't the case? I thought that maybe the walls were thin and I could just hear the neighbors talking or something. It was strange, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. I went to bed without issue and I was pretty tired from moving everything in. When the following night came, I heard the voice again. I started to think about what might have happened here before I got here. Maybe this was the reason why this place was available. Did something happen here? I mean, not exactly in this apartment because I was the first one who got to live there, but I mean something could have happened on the land that it was built on. I guess so. I asked myself, was this a home with a history of sorts? I couldn't answer the question, so I tried not to let it bother me too much. I tried not to care about it. A few days went by and I came home later than usual because I had been out drinking and making new friends. I put my key in the door and I turned the lock, and when I opened the door I froze. There was someone inside my apartment. I knew there was someone in there. I just heard someone's footsteps. I definitely heard someone's footsteps. I panicked. I slammed the door shut and I left the apartment building. I rushed to the local convenience store. Because I wanted to be around other people and I wanted to be in the light from the convenience store. I called the police, and when they arrived at the store, I went with them upstairs to my apartment. When we got there and I unlocked the door, the police called out to whoever was the owner of those footsteps that I had heard earlier. We waited, but we didn't get a response. We turned on the lights and the police asked me to check if anything was out of place or missing. There was no sign that anyone had touched anything, and it didn't seem like anything had been stolen either. Here's the strange thing though. There was no way that it could have been a previous resident because it was a brand new building. I mean, there was no one else walking around with their own set of keys. Well, in the end, the police encouraged me to believe that I had misheard something, and it was just a simple misunderstanding. I had and still have a hard time believing that, though I know what I heard and I know it was footsteps coming from the inside of my apartment. I will have to point out that I wasn't living in a dormitory. I rented my own place, so my neighbors weren't party-going students. My neighbors were in fact a young married couple. That young married couple had heard all of the commotion and came over to speak to me to see if I was all right. Maybe they just came to find out the gossip, but I didn't care. I told them about what happened and what had been going on. We ended up sharing stories, and I was surprised to hear that they had been experiencing something similar to me. I will sum up what they told me. People in other apartments on our floor had mentioned that they had heard a strange voice at night, with some going so far as saying that they had heard a woman sobbing heavily in the middle of the night. The wife of the couple next door said that she has woken multiple times because she sensed that someone had passed by the side of her bed, or someone had drifted into her bedroom. They also said that the curtains move even when all the windows and doors are shut. She said that before the police arrived. Her husband was saying that he had heard footsteps in the apartment. They told me that they never said anything to the police because they heard these noises all the time. He said that I'm guessing he means the sobbing woman whose footsteps we had been hearing just comes and goes and she doesn't stay long and she just sort of drifts from room to room, apartment to apartment. I asked if they were happy living with this paranormal activity. They said that they weren't and they had already made plans on moving out. They said that some of the people who live downstairs are also trying to move out. Apparently, lots of the residents were talking about moving out, and I hadn't had the chance to meet half of them yet. And I didn't think that I would meet them either because I wanted to leave now. I ended up staying there for about a month more before I found another place in my price range. I had a fair few sleepless nights, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Could it all be mass hysteria? You know, when a group of people believe in something enough, they kind of make it real. I doubt that, though, the footsteps that I heard first and make me doubt that I completely believed in that apparition. When I heard sobbing coming from the other side of my bedroom door one night, it was pretty much the most frightening sound that I could have ever expected to hear in the dead of the night. I have one really scary experience worth sharing. Back when I was a student, I used to go camping by myself regularly. At one point I was camping almost every weekend. I used to camp from Friday to Sunday out in the elements. I didn't mind where I camped, in the fields and in the shade of the mountains with no real friends at college. I guess I was just trying to suppress my loneliness by exploring nature. On the night that this took place, I got on the train and headed out with no real direction in mind. I didn't bring a map and I didn't research where I was going to be camping. I was just winging it. I knew there would be some mountains where I was heading, so I figured I would easily find somewhere to camp. I got off the train and set off into the wilderness, and eventually I found a nice area between two mountains. It looked like a pretty safe place, so I set up my camp for the night. I made a campfire dinner and then retreated into my tent to read a little before. I knew it was almost midnight. It was a quiet night. There was a breeze, but it didn't feel that cold despite being fall. I was comfortable in my tent. Well, that was until I heard the zipper at the front of the tent unzip. I panicked but tried to think logically at first. Was I trespassing on private property? Was someone here to move me on? Or could this be something worse? I was worried that I was in danger. The tent flap was fully unzipped in a matter of moments, and then I saw a figure. A man was out there. He leaned his head into the tent and I saw his face. It was just an old man. He looked the kind of guy you would walk past in the street and hardly notice as he leaned into my tent. He asked, "Are you traveling through here?" I couldn't wrap my head around what he was asking. I just shook my head from side to side to indicate no. And with that, the old guy zipped up the front of the flap and left. I was confused and pretty freaked out. I didn't spot a house in the area. I think the closest one I saw was nearly a mile away. What the hell was this guy doing out in the mountain? So late I started to wonder if maybe I'd seen a ghost or something. I knew deep down that I'd seen a real person though, but the absurdity of the situation had me questioning everything. Well, I guess the sleep was off the agenda for the night. I mean, there's no possible way I could sleep with some guy out there. He was comfortable enough to open my tent, so what else was this guy going to do? I don't know if he was a psycho or if he was armed or if he was a thief. I mean, he didn't look like any of those options, but I guess it's possible that he could have been all three. I definitely couldn't sleep with that on my mind. While I was mulling over all of that, I heard the sound of the zipper being pulled again. The front flap opened, and this time a completely different guy stuck his head through the opening in my tent, more or less asked the same question: "Are you on a tri-trip or vacation or something?" Again. I shook my head. No, to indicate. I didn't know how to answer this guy, and I wanted to give a similar answer to the first one I gave. I didn't know what they were testing. There had to be a point to their line of questioning. When he heard my response, he zipped up the tent again and seemingly walked off someplace. The second guy was younger. He was middle-aged, again very ordinary looking. I didn't know if I was being targeted or if this was just the beginning of some kind of game. I didn't plan on sticking around to find out, so I decided to pack up my things as fast as I could. I was worried, though I knew it was dark out. There was no moon out that night, and you know how dark it can get in the mountains in the woods, right? I didn't see either of those guys carrying flashlights, just keeps getting weirder and weirder. I needed to plan my way out. I honestly spent close to 20 minutes imagining what kind of scenarios would happen when I set foot out of my tent. I knew I wouldn't be able to see where those guys were, and they would come at me from any angle. I imagined a kitchen knife being plunged into my back. I had no choice, though. I mean, I had to get out of that tent. I could not just sit there and wait for their first move. So with my heart racing, I decided to step out. I equipped myself with a MAG life for self-defense. I slowly went out, but I couldn't see anyone out there. I thought maybe this might be my chance to get all my stuff packed up and just get the hell out. I was making promises with all the known gods that if I got out of there safely, this would be the last time I went on a solo camping trip. I shoved my things into my bag, but I stopped in my tracks when I heard the sound of approaching footfall. I looked up and saw those two men's silhouettes. I just carried on with packing my stuff up, but then one of the men spoke. "Are you going home?" "It's the middle of the night." I replied, this time said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I had an urgent call. I got to go." One of them then replied, "We didn't hear a phone ring." Naturally, I turned to face them at this point. They knew I was lying. I showed my flashlight at them and saw that they were wearing dark robes. They had masks perched on the top of their heads, as if they hold them up off their faces. There was something very disturbing going on out here. They stood there and watched me frantically get my stuff together. A thought came to mind that really scared me. It was like my internal voice said to me, it was a short life. I really thought this could be the end. I thought they were about to attack me. They didn't do anything though. They just stood and watched. I got my things together and just bolted. I heard something weird as I was running. I knew that there were more people out in the mountains that night. I could tell there were. I heard footsteps, branches snapping, and I swear I heard someone laugh. But most chillingly of all, I heard what sounded like a chorus of voices beginning to murmur something. I tripped and stumbled, and by the time I got to the foot of the mountain I was covered in unseen cuts and bruises. I spent the rest of the night at the train station. I didn't get any sleep. As soon as the first train arrived, I joined the morning commuters and got out of there. I must have looked like a wreck. I was definitely getting some strange looks. I kept my promise, though that was the last time I went out camping alone. It was a really terrifying experience. I don't know what those people wearing robes and masks were doing out there in those woods, and I don't really want to find out. I have a feeling I got away with something that night. Maybe it was down to the way I answered the questions they asked. Maybe they thought I was a local. I don't know, but if I told them I was on a trip and I wasn't from that area, maybe I wouldn't be sharing the story with you. Oh, and for those who are interested, this happened in Japan, for this happened to me in my early 20s, and as a direct result of this experience, I have now developed a strong fear and mistrust of the opposite sex. For that reason, I will be keeping my identity anonymous. It happened one night when I was on my way home from work. I got off the train at my usual station and I was walking down the street in the direction of home. I had my earbuds in and I was listening to music. It was just an ordinary night. As I was walking, I sensed a presence behind me, so naturally I glanced back. I guess that I might have been in someone's way or something. I looked back to see a man on a bicycle. He was wearing a surgical mask, so I couldn't see his face. Clearly he looked young, and when I heard his voice, I guessed that he was about the same age as me. He said something along the lines of, "Hey, when I saw you, I knew that I just had to stop and talk to. You are so my type. Are you free right now?" Realizing that this guy was just trying to hit on me, I pretended that I couldn't hear anything over my music. I just kept hoping he would leave me alone. "Hey, can you hear me? Or are you busy? Why is that? Why don't you just give me your contact information? I won't even contact you. Then why the hell do you want my number?" I wondered. I realized that this creep wasn't going to get the hint, so I decided to go a little stronger. I made a big gesture of turning my head away from him and I upped my pace so he wasn't as close. He did freak out, but it only took me about another 3 or 4 minutes to get home. So I just focused on what I wanted to do. When I got in, I told myself soon I would be sitting on my sofa watching a movie behind a locked door. I didn't look back. I just kept walking to get to my place. I have to go along some busier streets and some quieter ones. When I turned off to head down the quieter street, I noticed something suddenly from behind me. I heard some kind of clanking sound. It sounded like metal rubbing against metal. I turned around to see what was coming and I saw, amidst the darkness of the night, I saw a guy wearing a surgical mask coming right at me on his bicycle. I thought that our brief and horrible exchange was over, but it seemed pretty clear to me that he had been following me. My first thought was a really strange one. Even if I ran home as fast as I could, he would still catch me. It was true. He had a bike, and with that thought came a kind of internal avalanche of fear. I was confused and scared, and I wanted nothing more than to be off of those dark streets. I remembered that there was a coin laundry nearby that I sometimes used. I figured I could get there and into the light in about 10 seconds. There might be people in there too. If I was lucky enough to find someone in the laundromat, then that guy would probably go away. If not, I could lock the door from the inside if I had to, and then I could call the police. I turned and started sprinting. The metal clanking sound was getting louder, which I guess now was probably the pedals of his worn-out bike. I knew without turning around. That meant that he must be pedaling faster in pursuit. I threw open the door to the laundromat and got in without the creep catching up to me. Of course, no one was in. There were no other customers. That was just the kind of luck I was having that night. I locked the door. I knew how to lock the door because I'd seen the owner do it. I locked the door and I headed right to the back of the room. I was shaking with fear and breathing heavily. I grabbed my phone and as I was frantically trying to unlock it, I saw the shadow appear in front of the door outside. The guy who was following me had arrived and he dropped his bike to the ground and started trying to open the door. But then he realized that I'd locked it and this angered him. "Hey, open the door, come on, just open it. Come on. It's not like I'm going to do anything to you." "I won't do anything." "Okay, fine, just give me your number. I won't contact you, but if you give it to me, I'll go away. Just open the door. Come on, open the door." He was saying stuff like that. I remember because he said he wanted my number but he wouldn't contact me earlier. Now he was saying open the door. "I'm not going to do anything to you." The way he was double-speaking was really creepy to me. It was like his true intentions were slipping out. When he was getting frustrated, I wondered what more would happen to me if he got even more frustrated. He started pounding on the door with clenched fists and shaking the handle. The door was shaking in its frame. The door was primarily made of glass, so I wasn't sure how much of a beating it would be able to take. I was absolutely terrified of what was going to happen to me if that man was going to get in. It was time to do something. I couldn't just stand there cowering and waiting for him to get in. I yelled at him. I told him that I was going to call the police and that they would be here any minute. I said, "You better stop, you idiot. He stopped banging on the door and calmly dropped his arms down to his side. He looked at me in the eyes and I knew that he hated me. I think I'd upset his ego by calling him an idiot. He then pointed at me and said, "I'm going to kill you." Then he turned and kept muttering something, but I couldn't hear it. And then he picked up his bike and left. I couldn't move for about 10 minutes, but I had to. When an actual customer came to use the laundromat, I unlocked the door with my trembling hands and then I called the police. I made sure someone stayed with me on the phone until I got home. I got home safely that night. I hated that night at home though because that horrible experience happened on a road I regularly used to get home. It led to a lot of fear and negativity during my commutes to work. It really ruined my life. In order to get back to being myself again, I had to move. I had to get away. I couldn't live each day wondering if I would run into that man again or not. Thankfully I never did, but it scares me still to this day knowing that he could still be somewhere out there. I don't own a TV and I don't watch TV. I have a computer with a monitor, but when I don't use it, I cover it with a cloth so I can't see the screen. There's a good reason why I don't own a TV, and I want to share that reason with you. I want to know if anyone out there has experienced something similar. It happened when I was in high school on a dark Saturday night in fall. I loved that time of year. I was a big horror movie fan back then and there was a horror film I wanted to watch on TV. I decided that I was going to stay up and watch it. I'm an only child, so I didn't have any siblings to fight over the remote with, and my parents always went to bed early. So I figured that I would be able to sneak out of my room and watch the movie at kind of a low volume. My dad's a real snorer, so the TV didn't have to be super quiet. We had a 32 inches cathode ray tube TV. You remember the type before. Everything was all plasma and LCD. It's one of those real chunky TVs like The Simpsons have. Back then, when I was a kid, that was a luxury item, to be honest. It boasted HD capabilities. So to watch my movie in the optimal spooky settings, I hit the lights and got myself comfy on the couch. I ended up dozing halfway through the movie, though I guess this was because I wasn't all that used to staying up late on weekday nights and the movie was surprisingly boring. By the time I woke up, the movie was over and there was just static on the screen. That used to happen quite a lot when I was a kid. When the broadcast ends, you just get static. I got up off the couch to shut off the TV, relying on the dim hallway light to guide my way. As I turned off the TV, the screen went dark and I saw something that I'll never be able to forget. I was on my feet ready to leave the room, and I saw that there was another person in the room with me. Someone was stood right behind me. I tried to think logically, was I seeing things? Was this some kind of mad reflection of the light? The more I thought about the possibilities, the more I found myself rooted to the spot I stood in. The person in the living room with me had long, dark hair and she looked like she was wearing a whitish dress. It could have either been a hospital gown or a night dress. I couldn't see. Her face was hidden beneath her hair. There was enough space for someone to pass into the room from behind me, but there shouldn't. No, there couldn't be anyone there. I couldn't take my eyes off of that woman. I didn't want to take my eyes off of her. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. I had to, though, in order to leave the lounge. I needed to turn away from the TV due to the position of the furniture. I was so scared that when I turned, that woman would come into view in real life. I'd see her with my own eyes and not in the reflection on the TV screen. I thought that I needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there and wait for something to happen. I decided to turn to see if I could see her in the flesh. I turned and something caught my eye. It was like a flash or something like. I could see something my mind couldn't comprehend. I remember that part so clearly, but unfortunately, or maybe I should say fortunately, I can't remember anything beyond that point. I was woken up by my mother and scolded for sleeping on the couch. I looked around and the room was empty, apart from my mom and me, and now it was the morning. Since that experience, I became reluctant to watch TV, especially at night. I wouldn't be in the same room as the TV at night if it was turned off. I was terrified of seeing that woman again. After a few years, my dad eventually got rid of that TV. I think that would have been around the time when digital broadcasting started. He sold the TV online to someone who lived in our area. He didn't think he'd get much for it since it was outdated, but unbeknownst to him, his high-definition cathode ray tube television was sought after by technology enthusiasts and he got a pretty reasonable amount for it. A few more years went by and I wound up working in a thrift store part-time while I saved up for college. The manager came back from some purchasing trip he had been on with some fresh stock. While I helped him to unload all the new stock from his V-Man, I noticed something that sent a shiver through me. He had bought a 32-inch HD cathode ray tube TV. Me and him set the TV down and he asked me to check the power to see if it worked. It was weird to see a TV like the one we used to have. Again we set it down, wiped the screen clean, and then something caught my eye. I thought to myself, hang on, isn't this the one we had? The reason that I thought it was ours because I got in a lot of trouble once because I scratched the right-hand side of the TV screen with some toy. I couldn't believe that the TV my dad sold to some guy years ago had made its way back to me after I was done cleaning it. I told my manager that I believed that it was our old family TV. I liked my manager, so I even told him about that frightening experience I had with the woman in the lounge. My manager was very knowledgeable about technology and he also seemed to be into spooky things, so I thought he would get a kick out of me and my story. At the very least, he tried to explain what happened to me that night. He said it was kind of like photography. In a sense, you know how some people claim to have captured pictures of spirits in photos. A lot of those photos are kind of old black and white ones. He said that the type of TV that we had may have been capable of something similar. The new types of TVs, like the flat screen ones, don't have the same technology in them, so don't worry about your TVs. Roughly speaking, a cathode ray tube uses a method to bend emitted light using a magnet force and project it from the backside of the glass surface. This is just my manager's hypothesis, but he said that perhaps spirits are attracted to the light and the magnetic force and they enter the space in the cathode ray tube. Well, that didn't make any sense to me, and when I tried to make it make sense, all I could imagine was a ghost going inside a TV to show itself on the outside of a TV. Well, that's what he thought I saw, so we just kind of left the conversation there and went back to work. I wasn't really satisfied with that explanation, though the woman was reflected in the room. I believe that this type of TV had the capability of revealing things that the human eye cannot see. It was odd though, because no one in our house ever said anything about it being haunted. I even asked my dad in later life if it was an accident, property, or a home with a history, and he said it wasn't. So I still didn't have any answers. I just got on with my work, thinking that what I saw was a one-off, and the only strange going on was the coincidence that brought this TV back to me. My boss asked me to test if it still worked though, so that's what I did. The TV wasn't capable of picking up a signal, and we didn't have an aerial in the storeroom, so I just hooked up a DVD player to test it. I put a DVD in and the TV appeared to be working well. It was impressive. That TV was almost as old as I was, and get this, we didn't even have a remote control for it. I just used one from the same manufacturing company we had lying around and it worked perfectly. After doing the test with the DVD player, I switched the TV to the channels and as expected, there was nothing but static. That was natural because there was no antenna fitted. I went to report that the TV appeared to be in good working order to my boss. I turned it off and turned to leave. The TV faded to black and I saw the shelves of books and junk behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. There should be no one in that room but me. But I wasn't alone. There was a woman in the storeroom, not a colleague, but a literal ghost from the past. It was her, the woman I had seen all those years ago in my lounge. I couldn't move just like last time. I was too scared to do anything. I just stared at her in the TV screen's reflection. I don't know how long this standoff went on, for minutes, seconds, but then I realized, like I did when I was younger, that I couldn't just stand there. I had to move. I had to get away from that TV, just like the time before I turned to face the woman in order to leave. I had to step around all the new stock we had brought into the storeroom. I was terrified to face her, but unbelievably curious. I turned and as soon as she came into my field of vision, I felt like there was an internal bang in my head and I lost consciousness. That is the last thing I remember before I woke up. The boss found me passed out on the floor in front of that TV. He had heard a loud bang, which I guess was the sound of me falling. I went home that day earlier than scheduled. I don't know what the manager did with that TV, but I'm guessing that he either hid it from me or sold it pretty quickly because I didn't see it again. So that's pretty much why I don't own a TV. I don't want to risk it because every time I passed out I was always woken up by someone. I live alone these days, so if I saw her again, I would be out until someone came and found me. I guess, or maybe it could be a kind of 3 strikes and you're out situation with her. It's just a theory and probably not a very good one. I wondered if the guy my dad sold the TV to had ever seen the same woman. Maybe the manager bought the TV off his next of kin. I think about that sometimes.